Hey friends, this is Mark Suroviec, host of the Workplace Solutions podcast, inviting you to discover the joy of work. All right, we are here for part 2 of our conversation with Lucinda Martinelli, creator and director of Whole Planet Consulting. In our previous episode, we covered the first 3 facilitation skills that every teacher should have. And we're back here with Lucinda. And before we get further into the content, we're going to do another icebreaker question real quick. So, Lucinda, I'm going to toss you an underhanded softball. What is it that you love about teachers?
What I love about teachers. Teachers are dedicated. They are passionate about what they do. Especially now, if you are not passionate about being an educator, you are not going to stay in that profession. You are going to leave. But that passion, the passion for their students, the passion for the subject matter that they're teaching is almost unparalleled. You have to really be in it for the long haul, or else you're not going to stay.
Agree. I think for me, I would answer that question. One of the things I appreciate about teachers is just how much of the things they do that is nowhere on a job description, of just how many overlapping things they do just because they are committed and caring and lifelong learners and care about people. So I appreciate that. And I think if you have a teacher in your life, go thank them because they have done an amazing job.
Yes, all right. Thank them, give them flowers, give them chocolate. That's a big thing. Shower them with gifts. Yes, they will love that.
Lucinda, can you go ahead and just mention the first 3? You don't need to define them again. Just mention the first 3 skills of facilitation that we did in the part 1 of the episode, and then we'll jump into the 4th skill.
Great. So the first 3 skills that we've talked about so far are go slow to go fast, be open, and question genuinely. Next is observe closely. And this is something that teachers do. They observe their students. One of the things that I parallel with this skill is the idea that there is no bad behavior. There is no good behavior. Behavior is communication. And I got that idea from my friend Lorelei Dreibelbis. She is an advocate for students with autism and other learning differences. But if somebody's doing something they shouldn't be doing, my first impulse is just to want them to stop. Mm-hmm. Cut that out. But telling a student just to stop is just not an effective way to get them to stop. I also spent a lot of my career trying to prevent those things from happening. And using these facilitation skills is a really good way of preventing those behaviors that we don't want to see necessarily in the classroom, that aren't productive for the classroom or for the student. And when I'm working with groups outdoors, I'm watching them closely a lot of the time. And I have a higher tolerance level for, I don't want to say behavior that's unproductive, but sometimes it is. So I'm letting the group kind of storm. I'm letting the group argue a little bit or get through the problem-solving process on their own. And I'm observing them. And I'm using those observations to tell me what to do next. I'm not necessarily interrupting them unless there's a reason to, and there are a lot of reasons to do that. But I'm observing them. And I think teachers sometimes, we get in the trenches and we have our goals, we have our objectives, we have our plan for how the day is going to go. And we don't always have the ability to step back and just observe our students and how they're doing. How are they interacting with each other? How are they interacting with me? How are they interacting with the subject matter? How do we think they're doing that day? That kind of thing. But I think teachers do that when you, especially experienced teachers, observe their students closely. They sometimes make different decisions about what they're going to do, though, than a facilitator does. A facilitator sometimes will let things go and just observe that interaction without intervening. Teachers more often will intervene.
And just to be clear, when you say there's no such thing as bad behavior, that's not saying that things aren't inappropriate or hurtful. Correct. It's more, how am I interpreting what they're doing? What am I, as the facilitator, as the teacher, learning from their actions and what message could they be sending where their reaction does not fit the situation, i.e. there's probably something else going on inside them because it's not about whatever just happened.
Yeah, it's a little bit about separating that behavior from the kid themselves. Okay. Yeah, so there are absolutely actions that can be taken in the classroom, behaviors that are not safe, and definitely you need to intervene and make sure that's not going to continue to happen. But it's not necessarily a bad behavior. All of those behaviors make sense once you know where they're coming from. And yeah, there are behaviors that just need to stop because they're not safe. So yeah, I'm glad you clarified that. But it doesn't make that kid a bad kid.
Okay.
Mostly observing closely has to do with observing interaction between people and observing patterns. So I'm observing how people are interacting with each other, and I'm figuring out, are there patterns of behavior, patterns of interaction that are divided along, especially patterns of engagement. Are all the boys talking and answering questions and the girls aren't? Do I have students who are the ones who are always answering questions and the rest of the students aren't? Do those patterns follow patterns of gender, culture, stereotypes, status, leadership and followership, all those kinds of things? Those are the patterns that I'm looking for when I'm observing. And I've learned recently about there are things that teachers are learning, specifically math teachers, that have to do with managing status within the classroom and how that affects learning. So students who are perceived to have more status in the classroom, either that they know more about the subject or they have social status, are more engaged and they learn more. They do better. They have better outcomes, better learning outcomes. So those are the patterns that I'm observing as a facilitator.
That's fascinating. All right, what's next?
The next one is my biggest thing, my passion: sequence with intention. As an adventure facilitator, one of the things I was taught to do was to choose my activities, which order I'm going to do which activities in. And there are specific ways to think about those that will get the results that I want. And I very often think about my sequence backwards. I think about, okay, I think this group can end up doing the spider web where they're going to be lifting each other through this thing. In order to get there, they need to have some skills, and I need to make sure that they have those before I get them to the spider web so they can be successful. So I need to make sure that they're comfortable enough to touch each other, that they're supportive in general, both physically and emotionally, mentally. They're, saying nice things to each other, and that they have some practice either spotting and or lifting.
Can you just describe that spiderweb activity for folks that aren't familiar with it?
Sure, yeah. So the spiderweb is kind of a net that's strung between either two trees or two poles. That net has very large holes that people can pass through. And there are various and sundry restrictions you can put on. Often the idea is to have people pass through the web and only use each hole once. So they have to figure out who's going to go through which hole and how they're going to get through and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And at some point, you have people physically lifting and passing folks through everybody in a tight area, and obviously the safety and risk management stuff.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So using that as an example, I once brought a group of people to a spider web, and the person walking next to me said, "Oh, we've done this before." And my ears perked up and I was like, "Oh, tell me about that." He's like, "Oh, it did not go well. People were yelling. It was really horrible. And people got so mad and it was awful." And I was like, "So tell me more about that." And he said, "It was like the first thing we did and da 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 da." And okay, there's your problem. In what world does it make sense to do this activity that involves close touching, safety stuff, lifting people right out of the gate?
If you had the
So-
women's Olympic gymnastics team, then it could be the first activity.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Some like corporate group where they hadn't really met each other before. No, that's probably not a good choice. So that idea of sequencing is really crucial. And I do whole day long things just about sequencing. It's a topic near and dear to my heart. And there are many ways to sequence. There's no one sequence that's going to work for every group. So teachers have this concept called scaffolding, which is sequencing. It's the same. It's basically the same thing. And the idea with scaffolding is that you develop places for people to hang the next concept on. So it's a little bit like going slow to go fast. You make sure that you have some basic things down, and then you go to the next thing and you link those two things together. So for example, if you're learning addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, you're going to use those things to then learn algebra. So it's scaffolded. So you make sure that you've laid the groundwork so that the next things that you do, the next things that you learn are going to be successful. Sequencing is very much the same thing. What teachers don't realize sometimes is that you need to sequence and scaffold your social emotional learning. So you need to sequence not only the activities that you do, but the questions that you ask and the topics that you're talking about. So for example, if students have just met each other, asking them how they feel about stuff is probably not the best thing to start with right out of the gate, because they don't have the underlying trust to be able to be honest about those things. So scaffolding and sequencing the social emotional things that you're doing is really important. The other thing that happens is that very often schools and administration, sometimes their solution for things is to throw a curriculum at it. So give teachers a book, give them a curriculum, and it'll be fine. Well, with social emotional stuff, that doesn't necessarily work. You can't just go step 1, step 2, step 3. Every class is going to do this activity day 1. Every class is going to do this activity day 2, and all that kind of thing, because every student is different. Every teacher is different. And what they're ready for is going to be different depending on the day, depending on who's in class that day or not. Combinations of students make a really big difference. So having it pre-sequenced for you is not necessarily a recipe for success. You have to know your students. You have to be able to observe closely in order to know what should come next, to be able to gauge their readiness for what you have planned next. And you have to be open and be able to be flexible and to switch it out.
So when you do like a social emotional learning workshop, do you have those things as a modular component where you can move things around based on the readiness of the participants? Or
when I'm teaching teachers facilitation skills, I actually take several pages out of the book Open to Outcome, and I teach them a method of questioning that is, I just said that pre-sequencing is not a good thing, but the method of questioning is pre-sequenced and it works really well. So in the book Open to Outcome, there's a 5-question model. So experiential educators are often taught to reflect with groups using the what, so what, now what model. What happened, so what, why is it important, and what are we going to do now? So the 5-question model goes a little bit further. The first question is, did you notice? Did you notice that you were faster the second time than you were the first time? We noticed that. Why do you think that happened? So that gets at the what was happening? Why do you think this was happening? The next question is, does this show up somewhere else in life in general or in other work that you do? Yeah, or no. Where does it show up? Why, when, with whom, under what circumstances? Making those connections to something outside of the activity itself. And then what are you going to do now? So when I'm doing workshops with teachers, I teach them that 5-question model and show them that it also follows the engineering cycle, the cycle of inquiry, all these academic things that we use this very same method of reflection and adjusting what you're doing and doing something new next. You also can use it to help students engineer their own behavior. So if you're looking at their behavior and going, there's an example in the book, for example. Did you notice that you just whacked that kid over the head with a book? Yeah. That's one of the reasons I love that first question is like,
do they laugh?
like, yeah. I noticed, like, what do you, it piques their curiosity, right?
Mm.
That creates that teachable moment. And so you're like, well, why do you think that happened? Well, in the book, he gives this example, and the answer that you get, it isn't because the kid doesn't like the other kid or he's angry. It's because he forgot his materials. He's been given an assignment, he doesn't know what to do, and he's at a loss. So he just, on impulse, just picked up a book and whacked another kid over the head with it. So then you go, okay, does this show up somewhere else? Yeah, I often come to this class without my materials. I often don't know what I'm doing. Oh, what are you going to do next? I guess I'll just bring my whole backpack to my desk. Problem solved. And I love this because it really demonstrates the skills that we've been looking at so far. The questions were sequenced with intention. There's a reason behind each question that you're asking. And they're in a specific order for a reason. You're observing closely. You observe that student. You observe that behavior. You've questioned genuinely. You've questioned that student, wanting to know what their answers are, not expecting the answers that you may have had in your head. You're open to the answers that they give you and to whatever solution the student is going to come up with. And you've taken the time to do this. You're going slow to go fast because now this problem is solved. You don't have to address this problem with this student again, hopefully. You may. Students forget. But in using these skills and in using this questioning method, you can open up a world of problem solving. So this addresses social emotional stuff, and it's going to keep them more on task with their content. Now the student is going to be ready for the assignment that they've been given. They're going to have their materials and they're going to be ready to go. So all of those things come into play in just that short, very short interaction.
There was one more, is that correct?
There is one more, and I keep this one for last because it's managing risk, and all the skills that we've just talked about help you to manage risk. So going slow to go fast, you're setting up expectations, you're setting up guidelines, you're setting up boundaries, you're setting up routines. Students know, like, you're setting up an environment that, I don't want to say a safe environment because that doesn't exist, but you're setting up an environment that has some safety components to it. So that's one thing. Being open and actually being open to different outcomes and those kinds of things. Being open to what people tell you when you question genuinely, number 3, is going to help you manage risk because, for example, in a high ropes course, if you're questioning genuinely and saying, how are you feeling about this? Mm-hmm. And they're sharing with you that they're a little nervous and maybe why they're nervous. I'm nervous about this because I just had surgery on my knee last week, and that's information you needed to know.
That's a legitimate reason to be nervous.
Exactly. And it's a legitimate reason to make different decisions about what they're about to do. If you're not questioning genuinely and not being open to their answers, with every question that you ask them, with every interaction that you have, they're not going to tell you that. They're just going to take the information that you have and make the decision that they think is best. And they may be pushed into doing something that they shouldn't be doing. And that's part of managing risk. Mm-hmm. Observing closely also is a really good way to manage risk. If you're observing closely, you can nip those behaviors that we talked about that are unsafe, that are problems, that are not conducive to the activity that you're doing or the interactions that you'd like. You can nip those in the bud if you're observing closely. You can start to tell that this is escalating, it's getting to the point where we're going to have a problem, and you can intervene earlier.
Thinking about that observing closely, I'm recalling a time in which I assumed that facilitators would know that observing closely was just a thing you're supposed to do. And so I was leading an activity, and it was a group initiative with some college students, and I had some student facilitators. And about 20 minutes into it, I turn around and the 2 student facilitators are sitting on the ground, crisscross applesauce, tying their shoelaces to each other. And and I almost lost my mind. I'm just like, are you freaking kidding me? Yeah, because it never even crossed my mind that someone while working with their group would be tying their shoes to each other as a game because they were bored and just
yeah. Oh man,
We had a good talk after that one. And
that's a good teachable moment, right?
It was a very good teachable moment. And as a person training young facilitators, I realized that I need to be very clear about my expectations and not take those things for professionalism for granted.
Yeah. One of the things that I've done as I train facilitators, so I also work at University of Michigan Adventure Leadership Program. I'm a lead facilitator. So I am training young facilitators a lot. I'm also a trainer for a ropes course builder, so I'm training facilitators there as well. And one of the things that I have them do, if I can, is to observe each other and come up with questions they would ask, to observe an activity. So as they're practicing in adventure facilitation, you have to practice briefing and managing the activities that you're doing. And I often have somebody else standing observing and coming up with those did you notice questions. And or I'll have them in the book Open to Outcome. I totally steal this idea, group them up in groups of 3, give them an activity for the 2 people to do, have one of them observe, and then that person is going through this cycle of did you notice and that 5-question model, and they rotate and each of them get to do that. So right off the bat, they know that they have to observe closely because that's the activity. That's
good. And who wrote Open to Outcome? Who's the author or authors?
It is Micah, Jacobson, and Mary Ruddy.
We've got time for 2 more questions. Let's go ahead and answer our favorite question. So it's time to spin the wheel of embarrassing moments. So tell us a story of professional failure when you screwed up and what you learned from it.
So there are so many to pick from. I had some really colossal moments. I was working at a camp and I was learning all the different things to facilitate. So the climbing tower and the high ropes and all that kind of stuff. I was getting ready to be checked off to do our climbing tower. My boss came to me out of the blue and said, do you want to get checked off today? Now, mind you, I had not done it for 3 months because it was in the spring. It was very early, but I had seen it a bajillion times and I was like, sure, yeah. So that involved her observing me, facilitating a group doing this climbing tower. Part of the thing that she was observing was the talk that you give beforehand, like all the safety stuff and all that kind of stuff. Do you think I could remember one word of what that safety talk was supposed to be? I screwed it up just so colossally. Eventually, she basically stepped in and just finished the thing for me because I just was not mentally prepared. I hadn't thought that's what I was doing that morning. So,
do you need a rope and harness? I don't know, maybe.
Right, yeah, it was like, so here's the thing. You can see our tower. There it is. Yeah, you probably need some stuff. Like, it was just, just colossal failure. And she was one of those bosses that just has such high expectations and you really don't want to let her down. I let her down so badly that day. It was really embarrassing. So what I learned from it was either be prepared. We talked during the last episode, we talked about how I've never broken a phone or a computer because I always have a backup. So be prepared is one thing. And then also it helped me to realize that if somebody asked me to do something, I don't have to say yes. If she had asked me that day, do you want to be checked off? And I said, no, I haven't done it in 3 months and I haven't thought about it in probably longer than that. I could have said no and gone and done it a different day, brushed up on my stuff, watched somebody else do it one more time before I did my check off. Like I could have done that. I could have put it off and said no. And I've had the opportunity to do that several times since then. And I've always remembered I have to do my little mental checklist. Am I actually ready for this? Maybe not. Okay. And then I've learned to say no a little bit.
Oh, good. That was a good story. Who is someone that has helped you or supported you in your career? Let's thank them by name.
Again, there are so many.
That's a good thing.
Yes. Person that comes to mind at the moment is John Newman. John was someone I worked with at University of Michigan. He is also a business coach. And when I was first getting started, he was generous enough with me to sit down with me and ask me questions about my business. And we kind of had a coffee coaching session, and he just gave that to me, which was a fantastic gift. He's also a phenomenal facilitator. And he's the person, if you've ever encountered facilitators who do this, it just can be life-changing. They're the ones that just drop the right question at the right time. And so I would tell him things about how things were going or whatever, and he would ask me a question, and I'd be like, I never thought about it. Or I never thought about it that way. Or it just shifts your thinking just enough. And I often think about the questions that he's asked me over the time that we've worked together. I'm sad that he moved away to Colorado. I'm in Michigan. He's in Colorado now. It makes me very sad. But yeah, those questions have changed everything for me.
It's awesome. Final thoughts, and where can people find you? What's going on in your world?
So what's going on in my world is that I am getting ready for a teacher institute this summer, July 11th through 14th. It will be virtual. You can sign up on my website, and we'll talk about these facilitation skills and how they apply to teachers in that teacher institute. It's 2 hours on Zoom each day. I tried to not make it overwhelming with a lot of meetings on virtual stuff. There are a few assignments in between that kind of help us move along quicker. But yeah, so join me for that. You can find me on my website, wholeplanetconsulting.com. You can also find me on Facebook and LinkedIn at Whole Planet Consulting. And you can find me on Twitter at whole_planet. The other versions of that were taken. I'm new to Twitter, so be kind in my Twitter world. But if you want to connect with me there and share things with me and all that kind of thing, I'd love that.
All right. And what final words you'd like to leave us with?
Final words. I will quote Dr. Smith, who said, "Sequencing is everything, but there is no sequence."
Love it. Love it. All right. Thank you, Lucinda. My guest today has been Lucinda Martinelli. We are doing part 2 of our conversation, facilitation skills for teachers. We appreciate having you on the podcast. Thank you, Lucinda.
Thanks so much, Mark. It's been really so much fun.
Life is way too short for work to suck. So if you want help to build your team, train your team, or manage your team, we're here. Come see us at workplaysolutions.com. Thanks for listening to the podcast.